Good evening, everyone. I'm Jenny. This is Malcolm.
Good
And
evening.
tonight we're going to talk about olive oil. First, we've just not long back from our 7-day immersion retreat that we ran in the Yarra Valley. And we're very excited that we weren't sure if we were going to be able to get another booking at the Yarra Valley this year, but we have in October. So we'll be saying more about that over social media over the next few weeks when we have all the details in place. But the second half of October will be our next 7-day immersion. We've also got a webinar series coming up this Sunday, our 4-part webinar series that we run 2 or 3 times each year. And it starts Sunday evening, 7:30 Melbourne time, and continues on the following 3 Wednesday evenings at 7:30. And we usually have a small group, maybe up to about 10 people. And if you're interested in learning more about plant-based nutrition, the why, what, and how, then join us at our webinar.
Even if you want a taster for the sort of things we do at the immersion, if you've done the webinar, then we'll take some of the price off the immersion.
Okay, so Malcolm's going to do most of the talking, and we know this has been it's becoming increasingly a controversial topic in the whole food plant-based nutrition world. And we always like to look at the science, and as we'll go through, there's little bits of science that maybe some people miss when talking about the benefits of olive oil. As most of you will know, we've got an extensive page on our website where we do advocate people avoid olive oil. So we get people regularly saying to us, but what about this science that says olive oil is heart healthy, olive oil is good for brain health, or whatever? So we thought tonight, we won't be online for too long, but we'll just unpack a few of the recent claims about the healthfulness in particular of olive oil. Do you want to take over?
That little virus a few weeks ago wasn't fun. It's controversy. We didn't know when we booked this that there's some, extra virgin olive oil debate on Forks Over Knives. Been a few recent podcasters talked about olive oil. So we thought we'd give you our perspective on it. And I think we're almost unique in an area of science and an area of evidence that we look at that seems to get forgotten in this debate, and that is simply food composition. What's found, what's actually in your food when measurements are done of the fats and the nutrients and the fiber. That's part of nutrition science as well. Nutrition science isn't all about, observing groups of people, doing interventions and seeing what happens. So let's look at the composition of olive oil. First of all, it's a purified oil. So when people talk about whole foods plant-based diet with olive oil, they've sort of, or any other vegetable oil, it's not a whole food, people. We had some whole food olive oil in our dinner tonight, some little chopped up bits of olive.
But not the 40 olives that goes into 1 tablespoon of olive oil.
No.
Just a few.
Yeah. So it's a purified oil, which means that it's super high in calories, twice the calories of the same weight of sugar, for example. Nothing's higher in calories than pure fat. And, oil, let's say olive oil is nearly all fat. It's got a few other things in it, which we'll come to. And if you look at the composition of the olive oil, you go, it's good fats, good fats, good fats. And it's become a bit of a sort of slogan, good fats. And once something's a good fat, it's a good fat, and you can be sure that the composition is good. But we've got an FAQ on that, a FAQ on good fats, and it's not all actually true. Like a good fat, we want to be low in saturated fat. Olive oil's getting up close to 15% saturated. the national recommend or generally heart organisations are generally over the years recommended less than 10% of calories from saturated fat. So if you think more and more oil is going to get you down below 10% fat when it's actually saturated fat when it's 15, it won't get there. It's mostly monounsaturated fat. And I guess for heart health, saturated fats are bad, trans fats probably worse. Monounsaturated fats are fairly neutral. Polyunsaturates may have some health benefits. Olive oil is mostly monounsaturated. And then a good fat, well, we get plenty of omega-6 essential fats. So omega-3 essential fats are ones that sort of tends to be out of balance and inadequate in the modern diet. How does olive oil score for that? Not very well at all. Like it's about a 12-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s, and we want to get down to about a 4-to-1. So the good fat doesn't really stack up very well. What about the dietary guidelines? What do they say? What food group do vegetable oils belong to? None. So it's really a discretionary food. And I guess the other thing to realize is that when you start to add one food into the diet, you take away some other foods. It's sort of like, if I eat 2,400 kilocalories a day and I consistently add in, 300 calories of something, then something else has to go. I mean, either that or I'm, systematically gaining weight. Um, so the extreme end of that is those that recommend 3 tablespoons of olive oil a day. Does anyone know how big a tablespoon is? An Australian one's 20 mils. The US one's just under 15, and international is 15. So we're the biggest at something. 1 tablespoon of olive oil, an Australian tablespoon, has 160 calories. That's sort of like 2/3 of a cup of brown rice or a can of Coke worth of calories. It might not be such a problem, except that it's so concentrated that it doesn't actually change the volume of the meal much. So you tend to eat more. And in fact, here in Melbourne, studies done getting people to add 60 mils of olive oil to their diet. Yes, they actually ate nearly that many extra calories. Not quite. We'd hope that people would sort of wind back on some of the other food. Um, we call that concept displacement. So if you went the full 3 tablespoons um, and you ate 480 calories of olive oil a day or any other oil, it's about a quarter of 20 to 25%, say a quarter of your day's calorie needs. The other foods get wound back, and you think, otherwise you'll gain weight. So what gets wound back? Food with nutrients. Like if instead of just looking at 1 tablespoon, 20 mils of olive oil, if you compared it with something simple, whole wheat pasta, if you ate whole wheat pasta calories instead of the olive oil, you'd get 5 grams of fiber, 2 milligrams of iron, significant amount of protein, etc. So this is the concept of displacement. And we think it does matter because, for example, there are a lot of women in our plant-based community who are low in iron. They do not need to replace a quarter or even an eighth of their day's calories with food that has 0 iron, because it will reduce their daily iron intake. And when people are really worried about protein and overly worried about protein, you add in a whole lot of calories without getting any additional protein. Probably doesn't matter for most of us, but I guess if you're on a long-term low-calorie intake for weight loss, it could put you below the recommended daily intake of protein. And then there's fiber. That's the nutrient that most of the Western world's deficient in. And of course, if you have a quarter of your calories as olive oil, then a quarter of your calories contribute no fiber. Anyway, I think I've said enough about that concept. Displacement, putting one food in pushes out, hopefully equal calories of other foods, but in the case of oil, probably not. Then we've got the issue of the olive oil studies, the Mediterranean diet rich in olive oil type studies. And then we come down to compared to what? If you want to show your food's healthy and you're doing one of these studies or doing a, analysis of data, you want to do compared to what? So the Harvard Health Studies, there was an analysis done there, and they looked at people who ate about 9 grams of olive oil a day, like about half an Australian tablespoon, um, and they seemed to have slightly better, health outcomes, dying of different diseases. Mind you, just about everything else in the American diet could do worse. But specifically in that study, they compared the olive oil to mayonnaise, butter, dairy fat, and it came out on top for reducing, death from diseases. It was only half a tablespoon a day. And the article had this big, long introductory section showing some bias, in my view, about all the things in olive oil and why it was good. Then you got down to the data and they said, yeah, and we didn't know, it wasn't specified whether it was extra virgin olive oil or ordinary olive oil. And it didn't do any better than any other vegetable oil. So it's like, yeah, okay, that doesn't sound that great. Sometimes people sort of look at the extra virgin olive oil, or they compare it and they say, look, this monounsaturated oil for heart health only, putting aside that it's very calorie dense, very nutrient poor, i.e., sort of like a junk food, putting that aside, what's good and bad for hearts? Well, olive oil probably wins against some animal products and refined carbohydrates and ultra processed food, but it just doesn't win if you compare it to something, the sort of food we eat, like whole grains and legumes, or even more so fruit and veg. Which sort of leads us to the issue of the good stuff in extra virgin olive oil. That's the polyphenols. I don't know. We've got a chart in our No Oil page where we actually looked at this.
And I can put a link after this live stream to that chart. And actually, can I just pause a moment? If anyone wants to ask questions who is watching, please type something into the chat. We're streaming to both Facebook and YouTube, so I hope you can all hear us. I hope we're not talking to nobody. It looks like there's a few people.
Maybe the microphone's not on.
Our internet keeps on wobbling. I'm not sure what's going on there. Anyway, sorry, go on. You were talking about polyphenols.
Moving on to polyphenols. And the chart we've got gives polyphenols at 60 in the olive oil. That's on a per weight basis, although that's only the extra virgin. And actually, some Australian studies, they must have better olive oil somewhere else, because some of the Australian ones, they said it wasn't that high in our extra virgin oil. But the ordinary everyday olive oil, this is mostly what people are eating, is quite a bit lower than that. But then you look at some other foods and you go, oh, there's twice as much polyphenols per weight in spinach. Oh, there's like 3 times as much in whole wheat, and 4 times as much in strawberries and ground flaxseed are off the scale. Then if we adjust it, and we say, well, that was very high calories, that tablespoon, let's adjust some of the other foods for, per calorie, and then there's no competition. Olive oil compared to many whole plant foods is a poor source of polyphenols. And you go, but they're doing all this research on the polyphenols in olive oil and extracting them and looking at their properties. They'd have to be orders of magnitude more powerful than those in things like strawberries and green leafy vegetables for it to, even compare with those foods.
Can I just give people some examples? So extra virgin olive oil, when you look at it, polyphenol milligrams per 100 calories is 7.6. Milligrams per 100 calories of blueberries is 1,077. So just wanted to get the perspective. 1,077 milligrams per 100 calories versus 7.6 milligrams per 100 calories. Okay, go on.
Yeah. So that's a surprise, isn't it, that it's not actually that high? I'd like to see more olive oil research in Australia and the world, like comparing olive oil to whole plant foods, like compare olive oil to blueberries or any green vegetable or strawberries. I guess the next thing we've sort of raised that compared to what, part of research. As the next bit is paired with what, and that brings us to a couple of big Spanish studies. It's interesting they do these big olive oil studies in Spain. It's probably just incidental that Spain is the world's biggest producer and exporter of olive oil. But look, let's not um, you know stay on that. So Cordioprev is one that really shifted. Some people in the whole foods plant-based world looked at that and said, okay, I'm recommending olive oil now, because these were people who had diagnosed with heart disease, and it looked at the next how many years? 7 years, about whether they had further cardiovascular attacks, heart attacks, strokes, and things. And 80% were on statins, and I don't know, like I think it was 17% of them had some other event, versus the other group, the control group, it was like 22. And I'd like to see better results than that. I'd like to be able to say to my patients with heart disease that you will get your risk lower than 1 in 5 of something happening in the next 7 years, especially if you're already on a statin. So the Cordioprev study then followed these people, but again, in the main paper, they talked about the diet as recommended, and which was different to the diet as followed. Right, you can have a diet you can recommend, but then you've got to look at what did the people actually do? What was the diet as followed? Unfortunately, the diet as recommended was reported in most of the research articles, and we had to go to a bit of a secondary article to find what they actually ate. And we found that the low-fat, high-carbohydrate group meant to increase their carbohydrate intake, and they didn't. The and there were some other differences as well, like the so-called low-fat group. Oh, it's 32% of calories from fat. Now that's really stretching the definition of low-fat. It was meant to be lower than that, but I don't think they helped them enough. Whereas the olive oil group gets this special olive oil delivered to their house each week. There are other differences, like the so-called low-fat group, which wasn't, let's call it control group, ate a little bit more animal protein. We know that's a risk factor in heart disease. But the Mediterranean diet, rich in olive oil group, ate more fruit, more vegetables, more legumes, and more nuts, which are all factors that are known to reduce heart risk. So, to pull out that study and say this proves that all that olive oil made the difference for their health, it's like, no, maybe it contributed, maybe it didn't. We know that the fruit and veg has a powerful effect. So that's Cordioprev. They also looked at thickness of the plaque in the neck arteries. And I think they said, the Mediterranean group went from 0.74 down to 0.71. And it's like, and 80% of them on statins. It's sort of like, not great. Middle-aged adults should usually points a bit lower than that, and young adults are lower again.
So
But
how much lower? Like if it went down to
if it went from
0.7.1
to 0.71, middle-aged adults, that they say 0.6 to 0.7, so they still stayed higher than we'd like. Or sort of like a bit of a, so what? That's not a great improvement. And the younger adults, it was less than 0.5. There was a PrediMed study, and maybe we won't even visit that one. The control group was 37% fat.
And got no assistance for 3 years in changing their diet. So it should have just been called a control group, but it was used by, the industries that benefit from the research as evidence that low-fat diets don't work, which was not true at all.
37% fat diet was actually quite a high fat diet.
PrediMed came out more than a decade ago, and so the latest one is Cordioprev, trying to prove the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, just to segue into what you're going to talk about next, Sonia's asked, any research you've seen lately supporting the no oil position you'd recommend. So there was a study done comparing people on a whole food plant-based diet with oil and without oil. Now, so that they couldn't be accused of, it wasn't a low-fat diet, It was quite like the no oil
There are a
group were
lot of
having
nuts
quite a
and
lot of
seeds.
nuts and seeds, but there was still benefit, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was a crossover study
Mm.
and they started off with an omnivore diet. Um, and the group that, one group started the plant-based diet with oil and the other one without oil. And they found that, when they change over, that when they take oil out of the diet, the LDL, bad cholesterol goes down. And when they add oil into the diet, their cholesterol went up. So that was a study of what happens if you just add in olive oil or remove it. And they kept the calories balanced, so it wasn't just that they systematically gained weight like would otherwise have happened with oil. I'd like to see more studies like that, because there's a huge number of these, Mediterranean diet rich in olive oil studies out there, and analyses of existing data that have said, those people that had a Mediterranean diet. And of course, Mediterranean means you have less meat, less processed food, more fruits, vegetables, legumes, etc. So that's like paired with what? And I keep saying, show me a study that shows that olive oil makes people healthier without those other paired with more whole plant foods in the diet. Anyway, so we finally got one and actually showed that it made things worse, at least as far as the cholesterol did. It's also another area where Esselstyn says olive oil damages arteries. And if you're familiar with Michael Greger, he talks about this test called flow-mediated dilation, done with arm blood flow and things. There's a dodgier way to do it, ischemia-mediated, that's not as reliable. But the flow-mediated dilation, Greger's got a nice video about what happens with a sausage and egg McMuffin. Like, your arteries won't dilate properly for hours. When you put olive oil to the test, when you put fruits, vegetables, one study had walnuts to the test, then not only does it not worsen artery function, but then if you throw in some sort of unhealthy fats, it sort of protects against some of that effect. Extra virgin olive oil is probably pretty neutral, like it's got enough stuff in it that it's actually able to protect the arteries against itself, but not powerful enough to sort of be protective against other food. So I'd have to admit that extra virgin olive oil probably has, all on its own, probably has a bit of a neutral effect on, the constriction of arteries. I think we're going to do quite a few questions, I think. Although we could move on to the dementia study. Should we mention that one?
Mm-hmm.
Because there have been some studies bandied around over the last few years that say that, olive oil is good for, reducing dementia. There was one we looked at, I think it was Mycoil, because someone, Michael, MICOIL, Mycoil, because some other plant-based advocates that have used it as evidence for olive oil several years ago. But this study started off with an introduction, and there's a language they used about, the extensively known, extra healthy Greek extra virgin olive oil of this study done in Greece. It was just overhyped sort of in the introductory stuff, and the language, the flowery language they used about how good the oil was before they even got to discussing results. This study was a bit sus, if you ask us, because you're meant to have a single endpoint when you do a study. Like, we want to see whether the LDL goes up, and don't come back and say that was the purpose of the study, but we found that something else happened. Because if you're looking for a less than 1 in 20 chance that some finding in the study happened by chance alone, then you don't want to look at 20 different things all evenly, because just by chance, one of them will be, statistically significant, like less than 1 in 20 chance that it happened by chance alone. This study measured about 12 different measures of cognitive function. We couldn't even work out whether it was 2 or 3 that reached statistical significance. We think that the third one didn't quite, but they mentioned it anyway.
So that means that 9 of the things they looked at, the oil didn't help.
No, in fact, 10 really, because there was one that didn't really reach this. So you sort of call that p-hacking, That is, if you measure enough things in a small study, by chance alone, you're going to find one or two that look better. There was another analysis of 3 French, cities looking at olive oil intake, and that sort of found that those who ate more in some regions, things are different in different regions overall in diet and lifestyle, did better on one particular measure of cognitive function, but the global measurement wasn't any better. Very hard in these big studies to sort of tease out the compared to what and the paired with, particularly the paired with what. I guess really, before we'll move over to some questions and things, but I'd just like to finish with a reminder that we learned from the food composition science that olive oil is extremely calorie dense and extremely nutrient poor. Like, a row of zeros, and it's got some vitamin E. I don't think I've ever heard of anyone being deficient in vitamin E. It's pretty ubiquitous. But if you look at everything else, everything else is a row of pretty much zero, like iron, protein, calcium, fiber. So with the olive oil being so calorie dense and nutrient poor, then if you add olive oil to your diet, you're either going to systematically gain weight, because your meals will be pretty much the same volume, they'll just have more calories. Or if your body's clever enough to eat less food to compensate for that, then you're going to reduce the intake of all those nutrients. So it's either gain weight or reduce your nutrient intake, or a combination of the two. There's sort of no fourth option there.
So just sort of coming back to the question, any research you've seen lately supporting the no oil position we recommend, I think it's more relevant to, we know that eating, there are quite a few randomized trials of whole food, plant-based, low fat, reversing heart disease, prostate cancer, what else?
Part of a complex lifestyle change, raft of lifestyle changes that actually improved cognitive function in dementia and slowed progression.
So when you sort of add up what we know about eating a whole food plant-based diet, and then when we add up knowing that part of the benefit of this way of eating is not just that we're not eating foods that are harmful, it's that we're eating an abundance of foods that are high in nutrients, high in antioxidants, and that a lot of the benefit comes from that. So it's like, why would you eat a food that is actually low in antioxidants, even if it's extra virgin olive oil, compared to blueberries, even compared to spinach, even compared to whole wheat? It doesn't stack up well. So there's that. And then we've got the recent research from Monica Agarwal's team that did compare whole food plant-based with and without oil. So it's like, I don't know, how much more science do people need? But what we wanted to do tonight was just talk about some of those studies that others have been saying, oh, this is great evidence that really, we shouldn't be avoiding olive oil. Well, we say it's not that. It's very either unremarkable or, in fact, it's a bit mischievous, some of the science that's been published, or the way the science is written up and then the way it gets reported is just a little bit mischievous. So are there any other questions? Anyone out there want to ask us anything else about oil before we just sort of aim to be online for about half an hour? So if anyone is listening currently and would like to ask us a question, please do. And
some people say, like, I'm very lean. I don't mind. It's not going to matter if I gain weight or I need to gain weight.
Also, or with those that are trying to gain weight,
oh, well,
it's okay to add in oil.
Wouldn't you like a few more nutrients with that? Even more polyphenols? Maybe would
bit more fiber with that?
Would you like some fiber? Like, if there's,
would you like some protein with that?
Yeah, even protein. And And as I said, the number of, iron, for example. So I wouldn't even recommend it. If someone was weight gain and things, and they said, look, I'm going to eat more nuts. It's like, I wouldn't do that first. Yeah, someone's put a question, what
What about
about
nuts?
nuts? Yeah, that's interesting because, there's a sort of whole foods, plant-based sort of spectrum of foods ranging from, the low-fat ones, like most of the legumes, the whole grains, the potatoes and the fruits and things. And then there's the other end of the whole foods plant-based spectrum, which are those foods that are naturally quite high in fats, like the nuts and seeds. And again, if you're thinking that your favorite nut is, really good fats, have a look at an FAQ on nuts, and you might actually be a bit appalled about how low in omega-3s and how moderate in saturated fat they are. Some of the seeds do a little bit better. So we're a bit unsure, but generally the sort of disease reversal work of Pritikin, Ornish, Esselstyn, Barnard, McDougall has
And what we witness at our event, our immersions.
Yeah, I have seen that before, where I've had a patient with high nut intake and their cholesterol's a little bit high, and it's like, let's reduce that and see what happens, and it goes down, or they lose weight a bit better.
Or even someone who had a resolution of foot pain from, combination of reducing the nuts, which have a lot of calories, and increasing things like, leafy greens and, whole grains and etc. So,
and how many are too many? For a lot of us, I mean, a lot of people have, a little bit too much weight, and we're not fat shaming or anything, but it just looks like we can be pretty sure that humans in their lean state, which is what hunter-gatherers would have been, generally do well in health, but as we gain weight, we seem to increase the inflammation and some of the hormone levels and things. And so that, if the goal is to lose weight, then you must be careful about nuts, particularly the nut butters. But, there might be other people who can eat more nuts and things, although we have seen, examples where that sort of unfolded badly with, lipemia, fatty blood in those people. But I'd say, if you're sure you're the person that can eat more nuts, or you've tried eating, oatmeal cookies and dates, and you still can't maintain your weight because you're doing, 100 kilometers of cycling a day, or you have a problem eating enough volume of food, then perhaps you're the one who, perhaps eating more nuts is for you. But I say to people, if you're going to do that, just have a look at the omega-6 to 3 ratios, and make sure that you sort of keep that balance reasonable, that you don't sort of have massive amounts of the omega-6 fats, which are sort of going to mess with the omega-3s.
So, I mean, the nuts that we have in our house and that we sometimes cook with is walnuts, because they have a profile of 4:1 of omega-6 to omega-3. All the others from the nuts family are much higher than that. Ratios of cashews 125:1, almonds 2000:1. So they're not great for omega-3. And just tiny amounts will be just fine.
And someone here says, I think it's easy to eat a lot of nuts without trying too hard. And this comes down to calorie density, which, works both ways. Like if I try and live on vegetables, I probably can't eat 10 kilograms a day and meet my calorie needs. So, it's not going to be adequate. I mean, add in some richer food like, whole grains, legumes, starchy vegetables. If you look at the equivalent amount of calories of, nuts on a plate next to another plate with potato on it, a baked potato, then or fruit, you'll see that the actual nuts, it's a tiny little amount, packs a lot of calories. So therefore, it's easier to eat a lot more calories.
In the part 3 of our webinar series, I give a presentation on calorie density where we go through all of these things and show, yes, once you start, it's hard to stop because they're so calorie dense.
And because you're a hunter-gatherer,
You're wired to be attracted to these foods.
To foods that are higher in calories. Even though, hunter-gatherer days, you're not going to have a lot of nuts. You're not going to have bags of nuts and a supply of nuts, and definitely
throughout the year.
Definitely no puddles of oil there. Although some of the hunter-gatherers did get into sugar in a way, because honey was a significant amount of a part of the diet in some parts of the world, which is sort of interesting. But we can do better than that, and most of us are not quite that desperate for calories.
And just sort of coming back to the big question about oil, and we've said this many times in the past. Why do we say no oil? Why not just be lenient and say, oh, a little bit's okay? So if you spend a fair bit of time, as we have, years, having no oil, and or only the barest traces of oil
when we
go out. If we suddenly have more oil, it actually makes us quite sick. So it's not that we're being sort of super fussy on some theoretical concept. It's amazing how the body adapts to not having it. And when you do have it, it actually makes you quite unwell. And this is reported by many people. And so the flip side of that is that if you do still use a bit of oil, you regularly eat out, food prepared by others is always going to have oil in it. And if you can have the oil and you don't notice it, it means you're actually probably getting quite a bit every day. And
because there can be oil in this and oil in that, and
they've pre-done the eggplant for the pasta has been done in oil, like all the way through. So my motto is, if you're not going out of your way to avoid oil, know that you're actually getting quite a bit, particularly if you buy the odd packet of, crackers that have oil and all sorts of other, most processed foods have added oil and salt and sugar.
and you may think it's not much, and it might be not much in grams, but remember, when you look at, how much oil has a lot of calories, it's like this much versus this much potato.
About 40 calories per teaspoon of oil.
Yeah, so being super concentrated, you can easily end up actually having a lot more calories from oil than you realize.
Okay, we should finish there unless there's any last minute questions that pop in. So thank you to everyone for listening to us tonight, or if you're watching the replay later, it will be on YouTube. It will also be on Facebook, but I think now Facebook don't leave them there forever. I'm not sure what they made a change there, but it will be on our YouTube channel, and you can catch our past live streams. We're trying to do them, more often than we've done them this year. We did 2 in January, and then we've had a pretty big time in the last couple of months with both some holidays, some events, and sadly my mother passed away, which I think was the last live stream we did was just after that had happened. So those of you who saw that would know that. So anyway, we hope to do these a bit more regularly now that we've got a lot of that behind us. So
looking forward to coming back with some interesting and topical subjects.
And always welcome for people to send us a message through whatever medium if there's little topics you'd like us to do a bit of an exploration on.
And if you see the topic there and you go, right, I'm going to take them on that, we're happy to have questions. Sometimes we might not be able to answer them, and we might go, okay, we'll have to look into that.
Okay, so thank you, and until next time, good night.
Good night.